Hello, Alan Ryder, Southeastern Railroad Museum. And this is our little switch engine, former Southern Railway 8202. And we've been working on this locomotive for quite some time. We posted 3 videos about building the trucks for it and putting the trucks under it and getting it going. And much to my surprise, we had quite a number of views of the videos and a lot of good comments. So I thought it would be appropriate to give you an update of what's going on. This is August of 2022, and we found a lot of little things which we kind of expected, and none of them are earth-shattering, but they all need to be addressed. So without further ado, we'll give you an update of what's been going on with our locomotive. When we left off in the last video, we had the locomotive up and running. One of the big things we needed was batteries, and this is a set of 8 locomotive batteries. They're called Monoblocks, and we'll be putting them in pretty soon. That's about $10,000 in front of you, and they're not light, so we'll have to use a crane and a special lifter to pick them up and drop them in. We have a number of car body items to take care of. Sooner or later we'll be painting the inside of the cab, but not quite yet. Right now we've got a few windows out. These are ones that were broken, and we're going to get some replacements for them. Here's one with the gasket material and such. The front cab door has a few issues too. We're missing the handle for the cab door lock. We've got the lock here, assembly, and it goes on the inside, but we don't have a handle for it. New ones are pretty pricey, so we'll figure something out eventually. And if you happen to have one in your pocket, just let us know, comments or whatever means you want to do, and we'll be happy to work with you. Also on the door, it's like a typical old locomotive door. It sticks. And we're working on that. The hinges are a bit sprung, and we'll deal with that. I thought about leaving it where it sticks like this because any old-time railroader is familiar with these old locomotives. You know, you're used to having to either kick the door open from the inside, or if you're on the outside, pull your shoulder out of joint trying to get the door open. So I don't know if we really, I think we probably do want to get rid of that bit of nostalgia. Another challenge we've had is the radiator shutters. It was assumed initially that the shutter cylinder was bad, so we replaced the shutter cylinder. So here's a view of the shutter cylinder, the nice new one. We thought, oh, that'll take care of it, but it didn't. So okay, well, we thought it might be the linkage. That goes back and down through there. So we lubricated the linkage and lubricated it, and it didn't do any good. So we pulled the screen off of the front of the locomotive, protects the shutters, and lubricated it some more, and they were still sticking. So eventually we took all the bolts out and pulled the whole shutter assembly out, and it was not particularly fun, but we found the problem. Turns out over the years the rust built up between the car body frame and the shutter frame and squeezed the pivots on the shutters so that they were binding. So as soon as we pulled the whole assembly out, put it on the floor, and got rid of the mountains of rust and stuff that was in the frame, they operate freely. So another bit of a challenge, but we got her back together. Along the way, we discovered that the shutters were not operating electrically either. This is the way they work. This is a temperature switch, which when it closes, it energizes this magnet valve here, which is really hard for me to focus on, but Energizes this magnet valve here. The magnet valve connects main reservoir air to the shutter cylinder, and that opens the shutters, but the switch was not getting power. So we did some electrical troubleshooting, and this locomotive, like a lot of them, many hands have been here before, and turns out that some of the wiring needed to be corrected and moved around, and also traced out a bit because a lot of it wasn't marked. We got the wires corrected and in the right place, and now we've got power to the shutter, magnet valve, and temperature switch. Another challenge has been the air brake system. It's been doing some weird things, and seems like when we get one weird thing taken care of, something else pops up. So little by little we've been working on that. Our chief mechanical officer, Andrew Durden, as well as another fellow who used to be an instructor for CSX, has been handling those issues. So that's the automatic brake valve. We rebuilt that, replaced the feed valve, and we're doing some work on the other number 6 SL air brake portions and sorting them out and trying to get them right. So again, a work in progress. So these are some of the air brake portions that we're cleaning up and getting ready, basically rebuilding for 8202. And Andrew, look at the camera, Andrew. Andrew's taking them apart. We got to order the rebuild kits for them, and then we'll put them back together and put them back on and hope they work. The part we find guilty subjects. It's the diaphragm, and I don't know if you can see the split in it, but there's definitely a split in the diaphragm where Andrew's fingers are. There you go.
And then another crack there also. So this one's about.
So that's the source of some of our gremlins.
Pretty sure that's why it worked for a little while, and then it decided that it was done.
Yeah.
So.
And then that's the piston, and you can see all the trash and garbage that collects in it. That's why there's a rule about taking air brake equipment apart and cleaning it every so often. This is what happens over the years. A lot of the work that I've been doing has been electrical. Turns out this locomotive had some low voltage grounds. And what's a low voltage ground? Well, unlike an automobile, positive and negative battery are not connected to ground. In an automobile, the negative is connected to ground. On a locomotive, they're both isolated. And what happens is over time, somehow or another, something will get grounded, and that's not a good thing. It can cause weird stuff. So first thing that anybody does to check for low voltage grounds is you use a test light. And this thing here is a test light that I made. It's a glass light bulb in a glass light socket. Everybody has different ways of making these things, and that's part of a pill bottle that I use to protect the bulb. So you come in, and the first thing you do is make sure that you've got a light bulb that works, and it does. So checking for grounds, you connect one lead to ground, and you can see it's sparking a bit because it has a ground. So that leads to ground. The other end is on the positive side, and the bulb is lit up. And when one lead's connected to positive and the other lead to ground, that means you have a negative low voltage ground. Positive low voltage grounds are a little bit more rare and often easier to find, but in this case, the next step is turn off everything you possibly can, open all the breakers. This is the control switch in that case, and try to isolate. And the next step is to get a meter. And this is a Simpson 260 volt ohm meter, and it's pretty much the gold standard among electricians and folks have to work on locomotives this old. It's a lot easier to use a meter like this that's analog than a digital meter. Plus, when it measures resistance, it uses enough power to operate the meter that any kind of stray problems will be overridden by the power from the meter. You wouldn't want to use this meter if you're troubleshooting a microprocessor, because you'd probably fry the circuits. But for an old locomotive like this one, it's the thing to use. And of course, you need a schematic. And this is a schematic for 8202. It's what they call a physical schematic. It's an older scheme that was used in the 40s and 50s. There's a simplified schematic for the locomotive here, and then this is what's called the physical layout, and the drawing and the wires marked on here and the components are more or less in the position they are on the locomotive. So, for example, this area right here, those are the main power contactors. Battery switch, fuses and such here. And as you can see, it's a pretty big piece of paper, and this is actually about half size. The nickname that most electricians use for these is bed sheets, and it's pretty obvious why. So how does one trace out a low voltage ground? Well, after one's opened all the circuit breakers and switches and pulled the fuses and the ground hasn't gone away, then, as I said, it's time to use a meter and check the stuff that's still connected to the battery switch. So you connect the meter to the negative side of the battery switch or any other suspicious area and connect the other end to ground. And in the case of this one, the resistance was like 2 ohms. So now you got to start doing the process of elimination. And what you're looking at is the back of the electrical cabinet. Down there, those are the leads from the battery switch. And a lot of the high power stuff is not broken by circuit breakers or fuses, and that is the case here. The negative for the auxiliary generator, the negatives for the load regulator, which goes to battery field, and a few other things are connected directly to the batteries. So you've got to start taking things apart. And right in the center there is where the negatives cables come up and connect to, that's actually the amp meter shunt, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a convenient place, and you can see that the studs are nice and shiny. Took that loose and started pulling wires apart, and fortunately the ground was not in the auxiliary generator. It wasn't in the battery field circuit of the main generator, both of which would have been a real expensive challenge. It headed toward the load regulator circuit, the battery field cabling that goes to the load regulator, and then that comes back and goes into the battery field for the generator and makes the locomotive generator do its thing. So after isolating these and finding out that it was headed toward the battery field circuit in the load regulator, I headed toward the load regulator. And this is the load regulator in all its glory. So this is the terminal boards for at the bottom of the load regulator. A lot of those have nothing to do with the load regulator. It's just where the power comes in or the wiring comes in from the electrical cabinet. However, the 2 wires here and here are the positive to the load regulator, which is fused. It comes from the battery field contactor, and the negative, which is here. And when I disconnected those, the ground went away. So the ground was in this load regulator assembly. Okay, so my next step was to take the cover off of the commutator part of the load regulator, and it was loaded with carbon, and the brushes were worn to nothing, and I thought, aha, I've got it. So I took the brushes out, cleaned the commutator and checked it again, and there's still a ground. And the way this works is that commutator, which moves around, I might be able to get it to move, yeah, just like that. If the engine's running, you couldn't do that because that's operated by the governor, and it runs this from a vane motor. But anywho, that commutator connects all these different resistors in series because there's a lot of power there. I think it's a 60 amp fuse for this. You know, as you want more and less voltage, it puts more and more resistors in the circuit. So, connected my meter to ground and to the negative side, which seemed to be the one that had the least amount of resistance, and looked at resistors, checked 2 or 3 different places where it seemed like the resistance was lowest. And one of the common problems is that these cables anywhere can rub against something and rub their way in to get grounded. And in fact, when I started wiggling down here, and I'll put a still picture in there, lo and behold, that bundle was grounded against the frame of the load regulator housing. So spliced a few wires together, taped them up, insulated them, and all is good, I thought. So close the battery switch, take the test light and check it again, and no ground. So okay, let's put the rest of the locomotive in. So close the control switch like that, and another ground appears. Oh no, another one. So same procedure. I decided to go back to the front where the load regulator terminal board was because that was easy to get to, and that one was pretty easy to find. Same process. Hook up the meter to ground, start checking negatives. That center terminal there is where most of the negatives come in from the main cabinet and go to different components. So start disconnecting them, and it's the fuel pump is grounded. So we've pulled the fuel pump, and it's sitting right here. That was not a very fun task. EMD likes to put fuel pumps where they're pretty hard to get to, or at least parts of them are, and this one was certainly the case. But we got it out. The next step is to pull the brushes out. There's one brush hanging loose, and there's the other brush hanging loose, and that isolates the commutator of the motor from the frame. And check again. So connect the meter to ground, connect the other end of the meter to the negative wire that goes into the frame of the fuel pump motor, and we have 0 ohms. So just so you can see, we disconnect the ground and it goes away. So more than likely a wire or something in the fields, the stationary part of the motor, is grounded. So we're going to take the fuel pump apart. Now that we've got the pump end removed and set aside out of the way, we'll take the motor apart. The process is simply take the two ends off and then pull the armature out, set it aside. There's nothing wrong with the armature. Once we get the armature out, set aside, then it's kind of a process of looking inside and see what we can see, and then look some more, take more parts apart until we get down to wherever the ground is. With the brush holder end of the motor off, we're going to continue to keep checking for grounds and jiggling wires and seeing if anything changes. And if not, then we move on to the next step. Take the front end of the motor housing off, and that'll take the armature off with it, and then we'll look around and see if we can figure out if there's any other obvious problems, and go from there. Now I'm checking to see if there's any problems with the brush holder assembly, looking here, looking there, and not seeing anything. Went ahead and disconnected the brush holder assembly and set it aside, and we'll move on to the housing of the motor. Just about all that's left now are the two field coils, so we look them over, don't see anything, so we're going to clip the splice on the wire that connects the two, and that'll isolate the coils, and we're going to find out that the one on the right is the one with the ground. So we're going to pull that out, give it a real good look, and see if we can figure out anything, and we did. At first I suspected it was where the wire entered the coil, but as it turns out that is not where the problem was. It was in a little bit different spot. There it is. See the little spot right there? That's where our ground is. So this pole piece rubbed into the coil right there. Yes, you can. I think you can see it. Which means this motor is probably junk. It probably can be fixed. Whether we want to fool with it or not, I'm not sure. And the reason I say I'm not sure whether I want to fool with it or not is because if we pan over here and walk outside, their box car has got a bunch of diesel locomotive parts in it and a whole bunch of fuel pump or turbo lube pump motors and all sorts of other useful things, and one of those might work. So before we try to repair this one, we'll take a look in there. So this is our box car full of goodies, quite a collection of stuff, and we'll swing right over here, and we have fuel pumps and other sorts of electric motors and pumps and stuff. So next step is to root through them and find one that looks good. And after sorting through the available candidates, this one seems to be about the best. It turns freely, doesn't have any ground, so we're going to give her a try. Okay, we're going to give it a quick little test to make sure it runs okay. And put these wires together. And it runs smoothly, quiet as a mouse. So we know we got us a good one. Fuel pump motor going in.
is such an awkward process that, because this motor is heavy, that I figured I'd try putting the motor in and then put the pump in separately, put the pump on the motor separately. Is running and it's not leaking.
Well, that about wraps it up for this update on our locomotive 8202. We're moving along slowly but surely, still plenty of things to do, but stay tuned. We hopefully will have another update soon. And as always, thank you very much, and many thanks go to all the volunteers who help out on this project. We couldn't do it without them. If you happen to be in the Duluth, Georgia area, come visit us, Southeastern Railway Museum.